So happiness. Reconciling grief. A life with love will have some thorns, but a life without love will have no roses. Anonymous. From the subconscious perspective, it is necessary to cultivate a healthy relationship with grief and loss. If you want to harvest joy and happiness in life, it is necessary to reconcile with the realities of grief and loss. Grief is a natural response to loss. All people will experience grief at some point in their lives. The main message is that there is no sugarcoating grief. Grief is no walk in the park. It sucks, plain and simple. There is no getting around the fact that going through grief is one of the hardest parts of the human experience. Profound grief is like walking through the bowels of hell, fearing that your gut-wrenching, agonizing, raw feelings will go on forever, with no reprieve. The hope is that, when your ship finds itself in the middle of grief's stormy waters, the seeds of hope and faith will take root deep in your soul. Then you will have everything you need to adjust the sails and steer safely back to shore. There is no magic cure or pill for grief. However, there are tools to help you reconcile with grief. It is a natural part of life and is an extension and expression of love. Grief is also the great equalizer in life. If you have great love, you will know great grief. The challenge in our society today is that grief is viewed as something to get over, or move on from. People often feel uncomfortable when talking about grief and loss. Society seems to think that the way to support a grieving friend is to help to stop the pain, not feel the hurt, or to get over it as quickly as possible. Physicians often prescribe pills to numb the pain as if grief were a disease. The reality is just the opposite. It is necessary to lean into the pain, to really feel the pain. Subconscious rule number 18. What you resist, persists. Helping the griever. High schools would do well to offer a course to students on how to help the grieving and adopt healthy grieving strategies for themselves. People often do not realize that platitudes and right-siding, suggesting the good side of things, is often not helpful, as the griever might not be in an emotional place to see any good side. People say things like, "Everything happens for a reason," or "You are so lucky that you had him or her for as long as you have. God wanted her to come home. Something good will come out of this. She is in a better place and is out of pain." We have all used these platitudes at various times in our lives because we just did not know what else to say or how to respond to a grieving person. However, platitudes often disempower and negate the feelings of those grieving and can make them feel worse. They may feel inadequate, shame, or even like they are outcasts if they cannot make themselves feel better. Here are a few things you can say that may be more appropriate. There are no words. I can listen. One day you will be talking about Jane and a smile will come to your face first before a tear. Be kind and gentle with yourself. You are allowed to feel whatever you are feeling. I can see by the pictures how much you loved each other. She must have known every day how much she was loved. I am here for you. I wish I had words that would bring you comfort. What can I do to support you? I can wash these windows for you. I can pick up groceries for you next week. What time works for you? You do not have to talk. I will just sit here beside you. The important thing to do is be there and listen. The sad truth is that even the sympathy and condolence cards that we choose are very telling on how our society views grief as something we need to get over or as a disease. They often have religious texts that support the reasoning that it was God's will. However, a grieving person experiencing their own dark night of the soul may have moments when they are not feeling God's comfort, or they may feel anger at God, and their faith is challenged, which adds yet another layer to their grief. Not only have they lost their loved one, but they also lost their belief system. This then can bring even more shame to the rough waters of grief. Most people are well-meaning and caring. They often have the best intentions when trying to help other people navigate the tumultuous waters of grief. However, there are many people who feel that it is somehow helpful to share their own grief stories with newly grieving people. It is an attempt to connect with them, but it will often make matters worse. It can also create a one-upmanship attitude or a competition for whose grief is worse, which helps no one. On the subconscious level, the person who is commandeering the grief might be seeking to reconcile his or her own grief at the most inopportune time. A new loss will often trigger feelings and emotions from past losses. This is not done consciously. They often do not recognize what they are doing. In her book, It Is Okay That You Are Not Okay, 2018, Megan Devine discusses the hierarchy of grief and states. You hear it all the time: no grief is worse than any other. Devine asserts that grief has its own hierarchy. For example, divorce versus death of a partner, or the death of a senior citizen versus death of a child. Every loss is valid, but every loss is not the same. You cannot flatten the landscape of grief and say that everything is equal. All grief is valid, but all grief is not the same. The subconscious perspective of grief is a very personal journey. It is important that we recognize that it is felt and expressed differently by everyone. How one experiences grief and loss is all predicated on the different variables and circumstances from their lives. Every event or situation from their past is stored in the subconscious mind, which is busy making connections with the experiences they are currently having. Their core memories and their associations to those memories are being recalled consciously or subconsciously, predominantly when there is a death or major loss, and high emotion is involved. The connections that are made, along with cultural norms, will set the tone of how grief will manifest emotionally, physically, and spiritually. Common signs of grief. Grief reactions to loss can be physical and psychological. It is not uncommon to experience periods of intense distress and feelings such as, but not limited to, emptiness, longing, crying, dreaming of your loved one, anger, denial, sadness, despair, insomnia, fatigue, guilt, loss of interest, confusion and disorganization, disbelief, inability to concentrate, preoccupation with thoughts of your loved one, fleeting hallucinatory experiences, withdrawal, avoidance, overreacting, numbness, relief, sadness, yearning, fear, shame, loneliness, helplessness, hopelessness, meaninglessness, loss of appetite or excess appetite. It may even include financial hardship if the deceased loved one was the breadwinner. Factors that can affect how you grieve. As a young child, you may have been told by your mother that, "No one will ever love you as much as I do." As a result, you may believe that you will never be loved or that you will never have a great love like that again. If you had harsh words or unresolved issues with your loved one before they died, or perhaps you did not have the opportunity to express your true feelings to them, you may carry the burden or guilt over lack of resolution. You may have abandonment issues or there may have been extreme circumstances surrounding the death. For example, if the loved one had a long, pain-filled illness, some grievers may feel a deep sense of relief because the suffering has ended, while others may experience a sense of guilt for feeling relieved. The so-called stages of grief, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and Kessler, 2014, wrote about, was intended to be a guide to help a dying patient come to terms with impending death. Originally, it was not written to help the grieving after the death. Society has done a great disservice to the grieving by adopting the stages as a guideline. The actual process and timeline for grief is unique to the individual because everyone is wired and programmed differently. Everyone has experienced different situations and circumstances that have undoubtedly had an impact on their ability to move forward after devastating loss. Normal grief signs and symptoms are simply generalities, which might or might not hold true for the individual. Grief is likened to a fever. A fever is useful to your body to fight infection. Grief is also useful to your biological and evolutionary needs. Understanding the aforementioned is vital to the reconciliation process of grief. By understanding the type of grief you, or someone else, is experiencing, you will be better equipped to uncover the subconscious needs that are attempting to be met. Acorn. Every emotion and every feeling have a positive purpose and intent behind it. If humans did not experience grief or sadness after a loss, life would have little to no meaning or value. Wisdom seed. Emotions and feelings need to be expressed in a healthy way. Grief is the mechanism to deal with loss and should not be suppressed. Remember, whatever you resist, will persist. Thank you for listening to So Happiness. Please go to part 2 for more on grief.